In today's bonus lesson, we're going to look at panning a character with a walk cycle across a background rather than panning a background behind a character with a walk cycle. So walking across the screen rather than the character staying in place and cycling while the background pans behind, and making sure that the feet stick down correctly. So the thing about this kind of an animation compared with the panning background, when you have a character walking and you have a background panning behind them, there's so much movement that you can actually get away with something that just looks pretty close, or something that just looks pretty reasonable. And a small amount of slipping and sliding on the feet is sort of acceptable with all of that motion happening. That equation can change if, for example, you're doing a close-up on the feet, or if you have a lot of detail on the ground or something like that, where it might be more obvious. But generally, we can get away with a little bit of slipping and sliding in the panning background stationary character situation. But in the case of a still background with a panning character, where the character has to actually move across the background, we actually have to be quite a bit more precise. And it's going to take just a little more fine-tuning and adjustment. Now, luckily, we have made our job much, much easier because Dolly's walk has equidistant steps on each foot. And if you remember, we made a definite point of making sure that each step was the same length. And we don't just mean equal distance from the frontmost, where the contact position happens, where the foot hits its frontmost part, to its backmost part. We also mean the distance from the frontmost part to the center passing position, and then from that passing position back to the furthest back position. Those have to be equal too, because we're trying to create a linear movement as the feet are touching the ground and moving along the ground. When that's happening, we want completely linear timing on those feet as they move across the ground. Then we can get them to match a background with a single speed. So that is going to make this situation quite easy for us, because all we have to do is find one speed, a single speed to pan her. And once we find that perfect speed, every single step will work perfectly. But we're going to have to make a couple small adjustment to her walk cycle itself, very small. And we're going to have to get this adjustment made, and I'm going to show you how to do that kind of quick and easy. Now, if you have a non-equidistant walk where you have, say, in a limp where you would have one step longer and one step shorter, then what you're going to need to do is find two separate speeds. And then you're going to have a couple little sets of keyframes that you're going to have to copy and paste and reposition a little bit. But it's honestly not bad as long as your cycle is a true cycle, in that maybe the right leg is moving a shorter distance than the left leg, but each time they are moving the same distance. And in those cases where you have a clean cycle, where each step, at least on each foot, is the same distance, then copying and pasting and repositioning keyframes will actually get the job done very, very quickly. So you don't have to worry about, oh, well, what if I have a character without equidistant steps? It's not the end of the world, and I'll give you a quick, super fast little demo at the end of this main demo as to how you would approach that. Now, it gets much trickier when you have eases. And if your walk, when the feet are on the ground, has eases on it, that gets a lot more complicated. Let's go ahead and look at Dolly's feet and talk about that issue, because we didn't talk about this when we built the cycle, but this is a great time to begin to discuss this. We never put any ease on Dolly's feet once they made contact with the ground and then slid back before picking up again off the ground. We did add these continuous velocity keyframes to just smooth everything out a little bit. And we just kind of did it blanket across the whole animation. And we've got those continuous velocities or auto Beziers on all three of these. And you can see it's pretty much equidistant. But we are getting probably a small amount of interpolation happening even with this just very benign auto Bezier. So just the fact that as we move across the ground here, we're moving in a basically linear fashion with no eases, that is part of what made it possible for us to simply choose one panning speed for the background, and then once we got that background panning speed working, she just worked. But because we're going to have to be so much more precise now, we're actually going to even take this small amount of interpolation off and just go with just plain keyframes. But I want to talk about this for a minute because you want to think about this. If I were to actually add ease into this, look at how far back that foot goes. And that means that each frame, this is changing speed, which means out here, I am going to have to either actually do frame by frame animation, bring out a guide or something, pull a guide out and line the guide up with the toe, and then frame by frame position the toe so it locks to that guideline. I might have to do something like that. Or I have to get my position keyframes made and then perfectly adjust their ease to match the ease in here. Or you're going to have to do the same thing with the background if you're panning a background behind. And that's the same thing with a limp. If you're animating a limp and you've got a background panning behind, you're going to have to alter the speed of the background to match the limp. And it's going to be fussy. You're going to have to, lock those keyframes together. It's not an easy task. But if you stay organized and you work in a systematic way, and if your walk is a good solid cycle, then it's never going to be a nightmare as long as you work in a careful way. Using guides, using guide layers here, that's very, very useful if you do have to do frame by frame tweaking, and you can want to zoom in and check at high resolution if you want to do that. That can really help. And that's probably easier, just honestly, just to do it frame by frame rather than trying to match the ease. Although if you're a real motion graph monster, maybe you can finesse that. I think I'd probably resort to frame by frame. But the big lesson here, I would say, is if you don't have to add any ease or fancy interpolation to the part of your movement where it's stuck along the ground. If you don't have to add an ease to it, just don't. Okay. Again, there will be times with an expressive motion where this is absolutely necessary. But if you're just doing a smooth, steady, rolling gait forward, you're going to solve so many problems for yourself by just keeping this linear. You can do whatever you want with this. We could have added ease in as she goes up and down if we wanted to. That's definitely a finesse you could play with. But for the part that's dragging along the ground, keep that linear. Now, in our case here, because we are moving a character across a background rather than the background behind the character, we actually do need this to be truly perfectly linear. And I know it seems crazy because, with a straight line movement, and you can see here the spacing looks pretty darn even. And when I adjust this, if you keep your eye on the motion path here, the movement is tiny, but you will see some movement. So I'm going to select those, and we're going to command click and turn them back into normal keyframes. But keep your eye on that motion path And I don't know if you could see that, but there's a tiny, tiny little shift there, just the tiniest shift in those keyframes. Believe it or not, that's actually going to be significant, okay? So we're going to come down here as well. And we're going to grab these 3 keyframes here where this foot is sliding along the ground. And we're also going to turn these and watch the line there into standard keyframes. And once again, you saw a little shift. But believe it or not, that little shift is going to mean the difference between our feet actually sticking with just one speed adjustment or not. So having control and an understanding of what's happening as your feet are dragging across the ground is critical to being able to make the right adjustments to this kind of an animation here. So now that we've got our true, for sure, linear movement across these keyframes that we need so badly, we can now start getting her to pan across. So I'm going to pull her back. Let's have her actually walk all the way through the screen. So let's just have her do the whole shebang here. So I'm going to pull her all the way back, and notice she's in her widest contact position. That's really good for us because that's going to allow us to make her sure that she's fully off screen, because you don't want your character to like flash a foot or a hand into screen before they really enter, or likewise when they leave the screen you don't want a little sudden kick up of a foot or a little pop of a foot out. So you want to make sure that you're positioning them off screen where their limbs are spread out the most and would potentially enter into the frame. So I'm going to hit a key position there, and I'm just going to roughly guess here. I'm just going to guess about 5 seconds, and we'll adjust that of course later. And I'm going to drag her across, and now before I get her all the way off screen, I am going to actually step around here until I get to that widest passing position. And oh, by the way, I do still have our timer map with our looping expression on here, so she's just looping continuously across. It's the same setup we had, we're just not panning the background now. And so as we move her across now, once again, we can make sure we're getting her, we can make sure we're getting her fully off screen here, and that nothing will surprise us and pop out when she's actually animating. Okay. Now that we have got our final position there, I'm going to hit the N key to bring our work area in, and let's RAM preview and just see what we've got. Awesome, so there goes Dolly trucking across. Now you can see, if you see her feet there, that she is clearly drifting forward, and that's actually quite a big drift. So we're going to need to slow her way down. Her pan across has to be slower. Now again, we're lucky because we're only going to have to make one speed adjustment, but what I'm going to do right here is exactly the same thing that you would do if you had to do each step independently. And what you would just set up smaller sections and kind of lock them in, one step at a time. But you can use the same basic technique to get the distance, or excuse me, to get the speed of the pan working for you. So let's go ahead, and what we're going to do is we're going to come in the middle here somewhere. And it doesn't really matter where, quite honestly, but I'm going to go right in the middle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a frame where her foot has just gone past the contact position, and that 2 frames forward, so it's flat on the ground, right there, right where it flattens to the ground. And I'm going to add a little marker. Click the asterisk key and make yourself a little marker there on the layer. Make sure your layer is selected, and that'll make you a little marker. And then I'm going to advance forward until my passing position, because if you recall, our passing position is the last point where the foot is still flat on the ground and the heel has not begun to rise up. So what we're looking for is that span of time between the foot hitting the ground and sliding back, but before the heel starts to lift. So I'm going to hit the asterisk key and add another marker there. Now I can J and K between those, and you can see the foot sliding and the amount of sliding that's happening on the foot. Now all I have to do is start to slow this movement down by pulling this position keyframe back in time. And as I pull it back, I'm going to reposition that foot, and it's going to slowly get closer and closer and closer together the farther out we pull it. So for example, look at how far it's sliding now. Let's go out a little ways further and it slides her back, but now watch the foot. You see, now it's not sliding so much, right? So let's keep going back. Almost not sliding at all. And you want to watch out because you don't want it to start sliding backwards, then you've gone too slow. See, it's still creeping up just a little bit. I'm going to go a couple more frames. Oh, I can still see a tiny little creep there. I'm going to go one more frame. Back, boom. Ooh, that looks good. All right, that looks very, very solid. Now, I want to double check this before I go much further. So, for example, here I can zoom in and we can jump back and forth between these two keyframes, and you can see, oh yeah, awesome, look at that, rock solid, beautiful. Okay, so now we know that we've got the right speed. So now I can pull back, and we should probably just for the sake of speed here, turn this to fast draft quality. And we'll be able to tell that the feet are solid even in fast draft. We'll go to that last keyframe, hit the N button to bring our work area there, and let's RAM preview that, and we should see nice, solid footfalls. Boom, boom. Great, look at that. Awesome. Okay, so really an easy process when you have that clear, equidistant spacing between each step. And like I said, if you can avoid, for example, uneven steps and especially eases, if you can avoid eases, then this process really becomes quite easy. And once you add those eases or that offset foot, it's still not going to be the end of the world, because once you have a speed set for the walk, and let's say, for example, I have worked out a speed from this step, and we'll just cheat here. To where this step starts. And then from this step forward, let's just pretend again. Now we have a different speed here, so maybe this would be closer or further, which is totally possible. And here, I'll delete these from our original pan. So if you basically had a couple steps worked out here, like so, because she's cycling, what I can do now is I can go forward to the next step. So we can go to here, and I can copy and paste these keyframes forward here. We're going to want from this keyframe to this keyframe forward. And with those two keyframes selected, I can actually click and drag them forward. And you'd want to use a little more precision and some guides, but I can basically slide that forward to lock in to the next position here so that she just continues on like so. And now I can copy and paste a bigger chunk forward and a bigger chunk. And as long as I position them carefully, I can get this job done pretty darn quick. So that would be how you would deal with, say, an uneven step, but still linear. Now, if they're not linear, like I said, you either have to try to adjust the motion graph to match the speed of the ease that you added to that foot drag, or you're simply just going to have to come in and do it frame by frame by bringing out a little guide to, guide where the heel or the toe is, or both, or whatnot, and just adjust it frame by frame. But again, the good news there is because it's a cycle, you can do this same trick of copying and pasting ahead and then just selecting the keyframes and sliding them all forward. And as long as you get them all lined up correctly, that will get the job done fairly quickly, and you'll still have really nice solid feet on the ground without having to do every single keyframe on every single step all the way across, which would literally drive you out of your mind. You just have to do left foot, right foot, boom, you're done. Then just copy and paste, reposition, and you should be good to go. But of course, our other big lesson here is that if you're in a big hurry and you got to work quickly, just avoid all those troubles and try to make equidistant steps. And that means, again, not just that each foot travels the same distance from its frontmost to the backmost, but also that it is traveling exactly the same distance from the front to the center and then the center to the back. So again, those moves are linear. The timing is perfectly linear. So this should hopefully give you a start for understanding the strategies you want to use for getting feet to stick when you're working with rigged puppets in After Effects.